a video kind of talking about Golang and Rust, and as you can see here, a couple other languages as well, just comparing them. And the main reason that I'm using Go versus Rust here is because they're both newish languages that and I aim to solve similar problems, not the same problem, but they tackle it at different levels. Whereas Rust is a little bit more lower level, goes a bit more higher level, and everything here is opinion. I'd say I'm an all right Golang developer. Barely, just because the language is so easy and it's similar to other things I've learned. I'm just starting to get into Rust, but one of my good friends is a data scientist who's been tasked with learning Rust to implement some models and kind of speed things up. So we've had a lot of talks. We went through most of Advent of Code together, where I was doing stuff in Go and he was doing it in Rust, and then I try to do some of his solutions in Rust and vice versa. So this is from a somewhat advanced programmer trying out two different languages and giving my point of view on both of them as I'm becoming more proficient with it. So just preface this with the fact that I am in no way a Rust expert, and this is mainly opinion for someone roughly in the same boat as me and just some food for thought. But I'm just a guy with an undergrad in CS, not a master's, not a PhD. I like self-studying languages, trying to learn functional languages, Lisps, just exploring computer science as a field of study. I'm a working software engineer. I've got some experience with back ends and not that great front ends. Just someone with a vested interest in computer science. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes here, but just my personal opinion as I move forward. So some of the differences to start out with is Golang is really easy and it's got really, really fast production time. It's reasonably fast, it's not blazingly fast as they'd say, but I'd say it's up there, and it's safe. It's garbage collected, so it's almost like bowling with guardrails. You throw the ball and it'll bounce around and you'll hit some pins, might not hit all of them. Whereas Rust is very hard. It's very hard to write. It's idiomatic, it's complex. You can do cheeky implementations where you have like all these different functions kind of piping data through them, doing all this cool functional stuff, and it's got slow production time, high learning curve, which isn't always bad, but it's very, very fast and it's very safe. And this is where the uniqueness comes, is there's a borrow checker and a strict compiler. So it's kind of like bowling with unlimited tries until you get a strike, where it only compiles once you get that strike, but it's going to work, it's going to be fast. And then, going to compare it to some of the popular languages and some of the things that I think, in my opinion, it's trying to fix or it's trying to emulate, trying to replace. So we'll start with Python. Python's like a bicycle. It's very easy to get started with. It's not that fast. And that's if you don't consider the other languages that are used to make packages. Like here, NumPy speeds up Python like crazy. Like this guy on the bike just zooming past everybody by itself, probably pretty slow, but you've got these other lower level languages, and Python's almost like a glue that kind of glues these packages together and is very user friendly, and I think that's why it's one of the best languages for new devs to learn. And I'd probably suggest that in school the first language you should learn is probably Python. So now we have C, C++. It's kind of like a motorcycle, make you very cool among programmers, but when you fail very hard, and it's fast, but there's no safety. And it fills a specific niche that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And with this, I'm talking about C. It's in the Linux kernel. It gives you that low-level control, whereas C++ is kind of like someone's custom role of C with thousands and thousands of libraries that you take on. And I don't want to get too political about that. I know some people are like Linus all the way on one side saying they hate C++, and some people are saying that it kind of fixes some of the stuff with C and helps out, but at the end of the day, it is very much like a motorcycle where you're kind of in free fall. If you fail, you fail. If you make it work, you're going to look pretty cool. And then we've got Golang. It's like a trusty Toyota and Honda, if we're going with these car analogies. It's family friendly, it's safe, it's comfortable, fast enough. Maybe like a manual car, because you've got pointers and references, but you don't really need to use them. So it's like a happy medium, right? You got the family sedan cruising around. And then you've got something like Rust, which is like a sports car, right? It requires practice. You're not going to get in the first try and understand much. You might even be slower if you don't really know how to use it because you're doing everything kind of the wrong way. And you should use it if you have a very specific purpose. You wouldn't drive a sports car to the supermarket or something like that. And, it can be at times pretty frustrating to get everything working. But if you can get it working very fast, very impressive. And then, just to throw it in, Haskell, because, Rust is kind of like C++ plus Haskell with the typing system. Haskell, cool, pure, extremely difficult, not very useful. In industry, almost like some of Da Vinci's flying machines. I guess if we're going with the automobile plane analogy, that's what I'd say Haskell is. So some of the cool things about Go is the compiler is written in Go. And I've seen on Reddit, on some forums, people saying, oh, Go's a toy language, it's just a high-level language with low-level syntax. But the thing is, you can write really performant, lower-level code with it. And the perfect example is the compiler. I'd say it's one of the most impressive compilers in a mainstream language. And, it's entirely in Go. It doesn't use LLVM. It's its own thing. It compiles right down to machine code. It gives you a binary that can run on pretty much any operating system. And I'd say Go really subscribes to the KISS principle, the keep it simple, stupid. It keeps things very simple. There's not too much opinion, but the guide rails on how the language is written are so kind of protective that you can't do stuff that doesn't make sense. You can't really show how smart you are by chaining functions together, writing very, very crafty code. It's also made by some of the OGs of computer science, the guys that worked on Unix. So that it's been designed with very experienced hands. And it's essentially better C++, but not a different animal. It's similar, it's just a little bit more well-behaved. It's a little easier to work with, maybe a little bit less performant, but for things that you would usually use C++ instead of C for, you can kind of start phasing Go in if performance isn't the only thing that matters. And then some of the cool things about Rust is it's really, really fast, and I doubt you'll watch a video where people don't remind you how blazingly fast Rust is. And there's no garbage collector. You are the garbage collector, but you're ensured to have safety. So I'd say that's probably the coolest thing. That's the thing that makes it completely different from other languages. And one thing to note is it's in the Linux kernel. And this is kind of like programming language Valhalla. Once a language is in the kernel, there'll always be some use for it. It'll always have support. Not sure if that's the right word, but it'll always have a purpose. It'll always be around. There'll be some practicality in learning it. And, being able to write cool, expressive code isn't a downside, as long as you're working with a team where people can read what you're doing. And it's bootstrapped, the compiler's in Rust, but it does leverage LLVM. It's basically Haskell and C++ and more useful than either. And in that sense, it's not necessarily a better version, but something different. Instead of just being a better version, it tries to do something completely different. And I think that's one of the most impressive things about Rust, is it's not just another programming language, it's a different approach to programming languages. So I'd say use Go if you want a job right now. Rust jobs are slowly building in popularity and number, but nothing compared to Go. And also learning Rust will take a lot longer. So if you want to get a job soon, learn Go. You'll be able to get a job way before you'd be able to get a job in Rust. And if you want to do something completely by yourself, let's say you have a side project, maybe a startup, if you're kind of intermediate or even bordering newer to programming, I'd say you definitely don't want to touch Rust for that startup. I'd say Python or Go are great choices. And if you think speed is nice, but it's not the end-all be-all, then I'd say go with something like Go over some higher level languages like maybe JavaScript or Python for a back end. And if you don't need to micromanage resources, you're not doing embedded systems, you're not doing super low level microservices maybe, you can use a little bit more memory, you can allow the garbage collector to do its thing. And I wouldn't recommend this, but if you only had to learn one programming language, I'd say Go is kind of the perfect blend of high and low level. So if there was only one, I'd say probably learn Go. But if you're going to learn multiple, I'd say maybe you can choose a different combination. So I'd say use Rust if you're a language fanatic, You want to get into some functional programming, but you don't really like Haskell. You don't really like Lisp. And I'd say Rust is more practical than either, so you can kind of get into functional programming while learning a skill that can help you with other stuff. Maybe you want to break into systems level tooling, but you don't really like C++, and I put rightfully in there kind of as a little jab to C++. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it definitely does have a purpose. It's definitely very quick, very impressive to know the language, but I'd say at this point, if you're new to it and you're not doing it for work, I very strongly recommend Rust over C++. But then again, just my opinion, don't know too much about either, so take it with a grain of salt. And if you need performance over all other things, I'd go with Rust. And let's say maybe you know a high-level language and you want to extend it. You want to write maybe a clone of NumPy or even something less extreme than that for Python or maybe even JavaScript. It might be nice to kind of dive into the lower levels, learn something like that to complement the higher level language that you already know. And then lastly, I'd suggest learning it if you're in school, maybe on break, or if you have a job. Because if you don't have a job and you're trying to find one, I'd say learning Rust is probably not the best idea, but let's say you have a job and you want to propose doing something in Rust to your boss, maybe move to a different position in the company where you already have Rust, but you've got that job secured and you've got time. Might as well give it a try. It'll make you a better programmer. You can never learn, I guess you can learn too many languages if you're not specifying at all, but it's always good to keep learning. And that's what's nice about Rust is you can learn some more functional stuff if you've only ever done OOP. So, comparing some code, Advent of Code Day 6, it's a moving window approach, and by that I mean, you've got this window moving, checking to see if there's n consecutive characters with no repeats in the string, and I'm going to compare an optimized solution and an unoptimized solution. And by that I mean I did one version in Rust without looking at anything except for the Rust docs, and it's pretty slow. And then I watched the Primogens video and did the one step from the super optimized version, where it's using an array to check, and it's very quick, very optimized, and just the opinion of which was easier as a beginner to get started with. So if I go here, this is in the Python folder because I originally did that, but one thing is the data that I'm using for this, it's one long string, but at my friend's work they generated like I think almost 4 megabyte file string. It's just takes almost 20 seconds to do Python with it, so it's a great example of how quick a language is, because with these little demos you can't really get an idea for it, but you can really see how fast something is or how fast something isn't when you're using that much data and you're processing that much data. So let me see if I've got this. So this is the Go package, and it's it's not too fast, it's not that well written, I'd say. It's very simple. You can see here everything you can kind of understand. It just uses a string with pointers to it, and then it looks through the indexes of that string to see if there's an overlap. And then one thing I really like about Go is that the for acts just like a while. So while there's an overlap, just keep going until you don't find it, and then return the ending string. So I think that's pretty cool, and you can see that if we test day 6 with hyperfine, now we're getting about 200 milliseconds. So pretty good compared to 20 seconds with Python, really good. And then we'll look at the unoptimized solution. And one thing I did with that is I used rustc with -o to optimize everything. I wasn't before, and it was taking like 3 seconds. So let me see which one that is. Yeah, I called it dumb because it's the dumb solution for that. So let me go here, give it some warm-up runs. And here it's taking a long time. You can see that even when it's running pretty quick, it's still taking about 3 seconds, which over about 10 times as fast as the Python solution, about an order of magnitude, but still not great. And this solution is kind of the first one I could cobble together, and being not that advanced of a Rust programmer, it makes sense that it is pretty slow. So let me just go over that. really quick. So here, yeah, I just look for the overlap, and I store that in a vector, see if there's a match, and if there is, then I return true, otherwise I return false, and I use a while loop, so while there's an overlap and I'm not at the end, just keep going, and you can see here that it's essentially the same logic, more or less, as the Golang solution. And if I look at the day6.rs, and this is the one that I got from the Primogen, where we use an array, and we know the exact size of that array at build time, which is 14 here. We can see exactly how fast this is going, or exactly how much memory is used. 4 here for the first one, and then 14 for the second one. So here, it's a little bit more cheeky, I'd say, but then again, not that much. It's still pretty simple, still pretty readable, but this is more of the kind of functional stuff I was talking about, where we've got all these dot function coming off of some data, but it's extremely fast, and once you get more proficient with Rust, it all starts to make a lot more sense. It's just that kind of proficiency step. You've got to look at a lot of code. I'd really suggest doing that and just seeing how people do that. So here we've got 80 milliseconds. So you can see the unoptimized Go takes about 200 milliseconds. You've got the optimized Rust taking about 80 milliseconds, and then the dumb Rust version taking about 3.5 seconds. And that's all compared to about 20 seconds for Python. So with that in mind, just some of my final thoughts on which one was easier as a beginner. I'd say the Golang was like at least 5 times easier than the Python one. Again, very subjective, but when I was writing it, everything just made sense. I think the only thing I looked at was just taking splices of a string, slices, and seeing how that worked, the logic for that, and then how to open the string. The original function I used to open it wouldn't work with a file that large, but once I got that working, everything was pretty smooth with Rust. You have optionals, and you have to unwrap them, and it's a bit more of a learning curve, even for someone who's kind of gone through the Rust book and knows the basics of the language. So I'd say Golang was definitely easier, and I'd recommend it to beginners more. And there's kind of this little axiom where it's like, I would rather write Golang, but I would rather use a tool written in Rust by someone that really knows the language well. And I think that's kind of the paradox, where if you feel like you can be the kind of person that can write Rust well and you have the time to learn it, I'd suggest it. But if you need a job now, or there's a project you want to do right now, I would definitely suggest Go. And that's kind of the boat that I'm in. I'm trying to do some kind of fun side projects, hosting a blog, want to write the back end for that, the authentication. And I think I would definitely do that in Go a million times before I did it in Rust, even though I really do want to learn Rust. If there's like a CLI tool that I want to build, maybe a daily planner or a workout planner, I would do that in Rust and try to learn all of the cool little features of the language. All right, so it's a bit of a long video. Feel free to comment. Let me know how terrible my opinions are, what you would do if you were in my shoes or in the shoes that I've described in this video. That's it for today. Thank you.